November 24th, 1971, Thanksgiving Eve. As families across America gathered around warm tables, preparing for feasts and reunions, a man stepped onto Northwest Orient Flight 305 with nothing but a black attaché case, a cheap suit, and a plan so outrageous, so daring, it would embed itself into the DNA of American folklore. He gave his name as Dan Cooper, and before the night was over, he would become legend. Somewhere high above the rugged forests of Washington state, as a storm brewed and the country drifted into a quiet holiday slumber, this man did the unthinkable. He hijacked a commercial flight, demanded a ransom of $200,000, secured 4 parachutes, and then he jumped into the cold, unforgiving night, never to be seen again. No body, no confirmed identity, no trace, just a ripple of rumors, cryptic clues, and an FBI manhunt that would span decades. Who was he? A disgruntled war veteran? A rogue CIA asset? A criminal genius? Or a ghost conjured up by the chaos of the 1970s? Tonight, we go deeper than headlines, deeper than conspiracy. We pull apart the seams of this mystery, thread by thread. Because this isn't just the story of a heist. It's the story of a man who disappeared into myth. This is the story of D.B. Cooper. And you're about to find out why, more than 50 years later, we're still chasing his shadow. He wasn't flashy. He didn't make a scene. There was no sense of danger in his presence. No glaring red flags. No raised voices. No twitchy movements. Just a man who looked like he belonged. Like any other businessman heading home before the holiday. He gave his name as Dan Cooper. No ID was checked. No one raised an eyebrow. This was 1971, after all, before the security lines, the body scanners, the constant vigilance. All he needed was $18.52 and a quiet demeanor. He paid in cash, asked for a one-way ticket from Portland to Seattle, a short hop, just 30 minutes in the air. He wore a dark suit, a neatly pressed white shirt, a black tie with a mother-of-pearl pin, later found abandoned. His hair was combed back, old-fashioned but tidy. Sunglasses, dark and reflective, masked his eyes. But it wasn't just the outfit. It was the calm, the control. Like he knew every moment that would follow. Like he was following a script only he had read. Flight attendant Florence Schaffner remembered him as polite, courteous, even charming. He ordered a bourbon and soda and sipped it with the ease of a frequent flyer. Never fidgeted. Never flinched. He lit a cigarette, exhaled slowly, and watched the smoke curl toward the ceiling of Flight 305. He sat in seat 18C, last row, right near the rear staircase. A detail that would later seem chilling. To the crew, he was just another businessman heading home. To the passengers, he was a ghost, invisible in plain sight. But behind those tinted glasses was a plan already in motion. D.B. Cooper wasn't just a name on a boarding pass. He was a ticking clock. Because within minutes of takeoff, Dan Cooper would become something else entirely. Something far more dangerous. A hijacker. A master manipulator. And soon a ghost with wings. But first, he had to make a move. And when he did, he didn't shout. He didn't panic. He simply passed a note. The flight was smooth. Routine. The kind of short trip where people barely settled into their seats before descent began. There were only 36 passengers aboard that night, businessmen, families, a few solo travelers headed home for the holiday. Florence Schaffner, a flight attendant in her early 20s, noticed the man in seat 18C watching her. At first, she ignored it. He looked like any other corporate type. Black suit, narrow tie, sunglasses still on despite the cabin lighting. Then he handed her a note. She barely glanced at it. She'd received more than her share of hotel room propositions scribbled on cocktail napkins and receipts. With a polite nod, she tucked the paper into her pocket. But then, softly, calmly, he leaned toward her. "Miss, you'd better read that note. I have a bomb." Time froze. Florence unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. Neatly printed in all caps were instructions, direct, unmistakable. He was hijacking the plane. He had a bomb. He didn't want to hurt anyone. but he would, if necessary. She looked into his eyes, though most of his face was obscured behind those sunglasses. And in that moment she saw it, not panic, not rage, but certainty, confidence, control. Cooper opened his briefcase just enough for her to glimpse what lay inside. Red cylinders, wires, a battery pack. The unmistakable shape of something built to destroy. She turned and walked to the cockpit, calm on the outside, panic building beneath. The captain listened in stunned silence as Florence relayed the message. Then they followed protocol. The crew kept the passengers in the dark. No screams, no rushing, just a strange, eerie stillness. Cooper gave his demands. $200,000 for parachutes, 2 main, 2 reserve. A fuel truck ready in Seattle to refuel the jet. And when they landed, no police, no tricks, or everyone on board would die. Back in the cabin, Cooper sat quietly, crossed his legs, lit another cigarette, sipped his bourbon, as if he'd done this 100 times before. He wasn't bluffing, but he wasn't reckless either. There was a code to how he operated, a strange civility. He wasn't there to spill blood. He was there for the money and the exit strategy of a lifetime. What the passengers didn't know, couldn't know, was that their flight path had already changed. That beneath their feet, a plan decades ahead of its time was quietly unfolding. D.B. Cooper hadn't come for chaos. He'd come for escape. And the first move had just been made. Back in the cockpit, the flight crew relayed Cooper's demands to air traffic control, who in turn contacted the FBI. Word spread quickly. This wasn't a drill. There was a man aboard Flight 305 with a bomb, and he wanted cash. A very specific kind of cash. $200,000. All in $20 bills. Unmarked, non-sequential, compact, and easy to carry. And he wanted 4 parachutes, 2 main parachutes, and 2 reserves. Why 4? That detail chilled investigators. It suggested he might force hostages to jump with him, or more disturbingly, it was a tactic to ensure he wasn't handed tampered equipment. If the authorities booby-trapped a shoot, they risked killing an innocent passenger. It was a move of psychological warfare delivered with the calm precision of a man who had studied his stage and memorized every line. As the plane looped above Seattle for over 2 hours, Cooper sat motionless. He smoked. He drank. He even paid for his bourbon in cash. It was as if he was waiting for a cab to arrive, not orchestrating one of the most daring air crimes in history. Down below, the FBI scrambled. Banks were emptied. Bills were counted. Parachutes were rushed from local schools and skydiving clubs. Agents searched for any way to control the outcome, any hidden angle, any chance to trap the man before he vanished into the night. But Cooper had anticipated every move. His demands were too careful, too calculated. He left no room for error, no crack in the plan. The longer the wait, the more unsettling it became. At 5:24 p.m., almost 3 hours after takeoff, the jet touched down at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. All window shades were drawn, per Cooper's instructions, to keep snipers guessing. The lights on the runway were dimmed. Police kept their distance. A Northwest employee approached the plane carrying a knapsack stuffed with cash and 4 parachutes. Cooper watched from the shadows of the cabin. The moment it was confirmed that his demands had been met, he made his next move. He let the passengers go. All 36 of them. Men, women, children. They walked off the plane in stunned silence, still unaware of what had truly been unfolding above them. Some would only understand hours later, when their faces were splashed across the news as survivors. That act, the release of the passengers, wasn't just merciful. It was brilliant. It defused the hostage situation, reduced the risk of sudden violence, and bought Cooper even more control. Now only 5 people remained on board. Cooper, the pilot, the co-pilot, the flight engineer, and 1 flight attendant. The jet refueled. The cabin darkened once again. And with his money, his parachutes, and his exit plan firmly in hand, Cooper gave his next chilling instruction. They would fly again, but not to safety, to something far more uncertain. Because what came next was the most impossible part of the plan. The sky was pitch black. A storm system had moved in, casting a heavy blanket of clouds over the Pacific Northwest. Rain battered the tarmac. The temperature had dropped sharply. And yet, at 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 was once again in the air, headed, allegedly, for Mexico City. Cooper had laid out specific instructions for the flight. They were to fly low, no higher than 10,000 feet. Cabin pressure had to remain unsealed. Flaps partially extended. Landing gear down. Slow speed, around 170 knots. All of it was designed not for flight efficiency, but for something else entirely. A jump. A controlled mid-air escape. The flight path was set southeast toward Reno, with Mexico City as the final destination. But Cooper never intended to make it to Mexico. He had a different exit in mind, one that defied logic, physics, and every known protocol. Somewhere over southwestern Washington, just north of the Lewis River, the impossible began. At exactly 8:13 p.m., the aircraft experienced a sudden shift in pressure, a noticeable upward bump, followed by turbulence in the rear fuselage. The rear staircase had deployed. The aircrew sealed off in the cockpit per Cooper's demand, radioed in the jolt. But they didn't know what it meant. No one had seen Cooper jump. No one heard the moment he stepped into the wind. But he was gone, into the freezing night, into 200-mile-per-hour winds, into the thick wilderness of southern Washington, an unlit maze of ridgelines, rivers, and trees that swallowed everything it touched. Let's stop and consider this for a moment. The man had jumped at night, in a business suit, with a parachute jury-rigged from borrowed school gear, with no helmet, no GPS, no lighting, no visibility. Winds were surging. Temperatures were near freezing. The terrain below was unforgiving, remote, forested, uneven. There were no lights, no roads, no clearings. And strapped to his chest? A bag of cash weighing over 20 pounds. Most skydivers would call that suicide. Yet Cooper didn't hesitate. He chose the aft stairs, something most experts at the time didn't even realize could be lowered mid-flight. He selected a military-style parachute, not the newer sport models. He knew his route. He had drawn the FBI into a trap of their own design. And then he was gone. No distress, no sound, just a man leaping into the void, and a mystery beginning to spiral into legend. When the plane landed in Reno just after 10 p.m., the FBI stormed aboard. No Cooper. The rear stairs still hung open. The money, the parachutes, gone. All that remained was an empty seat, a clip-on tie, a mother-of-pearl pin, and a silence that screamed through the fuselage. The FBI began the manhunt that night. But they weren't just chasing a suspect. They were chasing a ghost with a parachute, and a head start into the darkness. The moment Cooper vanished into the night sky, the FBI activated one of the largest manhunts in U.S. history. Agents swarmed the region, forests, riverbanks, back roads, and mountain passes stretching from southwest Washington to northern Oregon. Military helicopters and local police joined the effort. The terrain, already rugged, had been drenched by freezing rain. Tracks, if there had been any, were gone by morning. Inside the aircraft, investigators began to reconstruct what little Cooper had left behind. A black clip-on tie, a mother-of-pearl tie pin, 8 cigarette butts, each still smoldering when found, heavy with the scent of unfiltered tobacco, and the note, retrieved by Florence Schaffner after the jump. It had been carefully taken back by Cooper at first, but another version was scrawled later, stating his demands. There were no fingerprints, no wallet, no ID, no boarding pass. Cooper had touched almost nothing, and what he had touched left no viable forensic trace. The only visual clue they had? A description, pieced together from the memories of flight attendants Schaffner and Tina Mucklow. With the help of an FBI composite artist, they created a sketch. White male, mid-40s, 5 foot, 10 to 6 feet tall, 170 to 180 pounds, wearing a black suit, white shirt, and black overcoat. The image went out to the press within days. And just like that, a face was born, D.B. Cooper. It wasn't even the name he gave. That had been Dan Cooper. But a reporter misheard or miswrote, and the name D.B. Cooper stuck like glue to American folklore. Over the next 5 years, the FBI would interview more than 800 suspects. Truckers, veterans, bank robbers, engineers, people who disappeared that same night, people whose friends insisted they suddenly had money, people who confessed, even bragged, to being Cooper, only to crumble under scrutiny. But none fit. Not quite. Some agents were convinced Cooper had died during the jump. They pointed to the weather, the darkness, the weight of the money. No experienced parachutist would leap under such impossible conditions, they argued. Others pushed back. Cooper knew too much. He had asked for specific parachutes, knew the exact model of the Boeing 727, understood how to open the aft stairs mid-flight, something not even the flight crew fully grasped. He wasn't reckless. He was prepared. Still, the search area, based on the plane's radar and Cooper's likely trajectory, may have been off. The FBI calculated a jump zone near Ariel, Washington, a remote stretch of woods. But turbulence, wind drift, and conflicting reports from the flight crew suggested he could have exited further west. No body was found, no parachute, no ransom bills turned up in circulation. Just theories. He died, and his remains were swallowed by the forest. He landed injured and died days later. Or he walked away, cold, wet, and alive into the night. And if he did, the FBI had a bigger problem, because they weren't just looking for a skyjacker anymore. They were hunting a man who had beaten them on their own turf, with a smirk and a parachute. 9 years passed. The story of D.B. Cooper had begun to fade, slowly, reluctantly, into the shadows of old headlines and unsolved legends. The case, still technically open, had cooled. No new suspects, no solid leads, no evidence, just a long, unanswered question echoing through time. Then, in 1980, a break. It didn't come from an FBI briefing or a forensic lab. It came from a shovel in the hands of an 8-year-old boy. Brian Ingram was digging in the sand along the Columbia River's Tennebar, just north of Portland, Oregon. His family was on vacation, enjoying the breezy shoreline. Nothing unusual, nothing remarkable, until he hit something. Not rock, not driftwood, a decaying bundle, layers of rubber bands, and a crumbling canvas package. Inside, stacks of old $20 bills, waterlogged and turning to dust. His father reported the find. The bills were rushed to the FBI. And then, confirmation. The serial numbers matched. Not some, not most, all. They were part of the original $200,000 ransom given to D.B. Cooper nearly a decade earlier. In total, $5,800. Carefully bundled, decomposed, yet intact enough to be traced. It was the first and only physical piece of the ransom ever recovered. But with it came even more questions. Why was it buried? Did Cooper stash the money and plan to return? Did he drop it during the jump? Did it wash downstream by accident? And why only $5,800? That's less than 3% of the total ransom. Where was the rest? FBI analysts theorized. Some believed Cooper hadn't survived, that this money fell during the jump and was swept downriver. Others suggested he had buried it intentionally as a decoy, or perhaps as a calculated message. But a curious detail haunted investigators. The bills were found miles off the projected flight path. Northwest, not southeast. Could that mean the jump zone had been miscalculated from the very beginning? Was Cooper never in the area they spent years combing? Or worse, was he watching all of this unfold, alive, amused, and perfectly out of reach? The river money gave life to the case again. Reporters flocked to Tennebar. Treasure hunters arrived with metal detectors. And the FBI kept digging, figuratively and literally. But no other bills surfaced. No gear, no chute, no body. Just the mud-stained remains of $5,800. Enough to rekindle the fire. Not enough to solve the mystery. Because while the Columbia River gave up a clue, D.B. Cooper still hadn't given up his truth. The legend of D.B. Cooper didn't just live on in memory. It spawned imitators. Lots of them. The months following Cooper's vanishing act triggered a wave of skyjackings across the United States, more than 15 in 1972 alone. It was as if Cooper had cracked a secret code, and now every would-be outlaw wanted in. They mimicked his plan. Hijack a plane. Demand cash. Parachute to freedom. But none did it quite like Cooper. John LaPointe, Paul Hetty, Charles Speck, Kerr, Goodell all tried, and all failed miserably. Most were apprehended within hours. Some never made it out of a cabin. Others jumped and were captured, windburned and disoriented, in the very forests they thought would shield them. But one stood out. Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., a former Army Green Beret, Vietnam veteran, helicopter pilot, family man. And on April 7, 1972, less than 5 months after Cooper's heist, he boarded United Airlines Flight 855 in Denver, disguised with a wig and fake mustache, carrying a grenade and a pistol. McCoy hijacked the plane and demanded $500,000, more than double Cooper's ransom. He got it. When the plane touched down to refuel, the money was delivered. Then, just like Cooper, McCoy ordered the pilots to take off again. And somewhere over Utah, he opened the rear stairs and jumped into the night with his parachute and $500,000. Sound familiar? But unlike Cooper, McCoy didn't vanish. He made a home. To his wife. To his children. He even returned to work at the National Guard base like nothing had happened. But the FBI was closing in. They traced fingerprints, found a jumpsuit in his car, and recovered ransom money in his house. McCoy was arrested just days later, sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. But even that wasn't the end. He escaped 2 years later, fashioning a fake gun from dental paste, hijacking a garbage truck, and busting through the prison gates. He was eventually killed in a shootout with the FBI in Virginia. End of story? Not quite. Because over the years, McCoy's name kept resurfacing. He fit the profile. Military background. Parachute training. Calm under pressure. A criminal mind masked by a clean-cut exterior. And more intriguingly, he'd never ruled out being Cooper. He denied it, then hinted at it, then denied it again. At first, the FBI dismissed the connection. The timing didn't line up. The faces were slightly different. Cooper drank bourbon. McCoy was Mormon and didn't drink. Small details maybe, but recent years have cast new light. Unsealed documents, family testimonies, and evidence discovered in McCoy's mother's shed decades after his death reignited the theory. Among the items, a vintage military parachute, a harness matching the era, maps, and a handwritten journal entry cryptic, but suggestive. Some now believe McCoy didn't just copy Cooper. They believe McCoy was Cooper, that the first hijacking was a test run, that he wanted to perfect his plan, that $200,000 was never the endgame. $500,000, now that was worth the risk. But without DNA, without a confession, without that one missing piece, the theory remains just that, another shadow in a forest full of them. Still, of all the men who tried to follow Cooper into legend, only one ever got close. Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. And if he was D.B. Cooper, then the man who pulled off the world's most mysterious heist also pulled off the perfect vanishing act. Twice. Decades after the name D.B. Cooper became legend, decades after the trails went cold, the suspects aged, and the evidence collected dust in basement vaults, a new clue emerged. Not from a government lab, not from a confession, but from a shed, a small weathered storage building behind the house once owned by the mother of Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. The shed had sat untouched for years. McCoy was long dead. His story, for most, had ended in 1974 with a hail of bullets. But for some, especially his family, the story had never felt finished. Then came Dan Grider, an aviation expert, a former commercial pilot, and now a YouTuber with a mission to reopen the D.B. Cooper case using modern tools, fresh eyes, and relentless curiosity. Grider had spent years investigating McCoy, convinced the FBI had overlooked something. In 2023, with permission from the McCoy family, he searched the old property. And what he found could be history-altering. Inside the shed, a military parachute rig. Old but well-preserved. A harness. And most shockingly, a pilot's logbook, dating back to the early 1970s. It was more than coincidence. The parachute wasn't just any model, it was military grade, used by specialized forces, and nearly identical to the one Cooper had used. Experts called it 1 in a billion, in terms of rarity and specificity. It matched the style issued during McCoy's time in the Green Berets, modified for jumps under extreme conditions. Was it proof? No. But it was compelling. Too compelling to ignore. The FBI, which had effectively closed the Cooper case in 2016, was suddenly drawn back in. Grider's findings were submitted. Federal agents re-examined the parachute. Forensic specialists combed over the logbook. The McCoy family, long reluctant to speak publicly, began to lean in. They weren't claiming Richard was Cooper outright, but they weren't denying it either. Instead, they offered something more powerful, the possibility, the idea that their father, their brother, their son might have been the man who pulled off the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. history, and then vanished. Forever. Grider's investigation sparked renewed media interest. Podcasts, documentaries, online forums exploded with fresh speculation. If the FBI confirmed the parachute's origins, if DNA linked it back to the flight, this case, thought to be permanently sealed, would roar back to life. But here's the thing about evidence. It whispers. It doesn't shout. It waits. And now, so do we. For the tests to come back. For the logbook to be verified. For the final piece of the puzzle, if there is one, to fall into place. Because if this parachute truly belonged to Cooper, then the man who became a ghost in 1971 may finally be about to speak. Through nylon straps. Through faded ink. Through history itself. It was easy to overlook at first, just a simple black clip-on tie, the kind you'd find in any J.C. Penney in 1971. Stiff, unremarkable. The sort of thing worn by office workers, salesmen, middle managers, stuck in a gray corporate blur. But that tie became one of the most enduring, tantalizing artifacts in the entire D.B. Cooper case. Because Cooper left it behind, on his seat, neatly draped, as if he were saying, "You can have this, but you'll never have me." For years, the tie sat in evidence. The FBI stored it carefully, but in the 70s and 80s, forensic science wasn't equipped to do much with it. It was a souvenir, a curiosity, nothing more, until now. Because what modern science uncovered within those cheap polyester fibers shook the case all over again. A deep forensic analysis revealed something extraordinary. Microscopic particles, traces of titanium, bismuth, and strontium. Not dust, not lint, not common pollutants. These were industrial-grade materials, not found in ordinary environments, and certainly not by accident. The titanium, in particular, was high-grade, used only in specialized fields like aerospace, advanced electronics, and high-tech manufacturing. The kind of materials you wouldn't find on a businessman, but you might find them on someone working in a Boeing factory, or a military contractor's clean room, or a classified government lab. Suddenly, that ordinary clip-on tie told a very different story. This wasn't a desperate man robbing a plane. This was someone who knew technology, who had been around exotic materials, who worked closely with systems most people would never even see. It narrowed the profile. This wasn't a thrill seeker. This was an engineer, a planner, a technician with nerves of steel and a mind to match. And then came the biggest breakthrough yet. A sealed portion of the tie, an intersection rarely touched, had been preserved. Inside, forensic teams found genetic material. Not enough for a full DNA profile yet, but enough to begin what's called metagenomic analysis. This type of analysis doesn't just tell you who the person is. It can tell you where they've been, what environments they've worked in, what pathogens, particles, or trace substances their body has carried. In essence, it builds a map. a fingerprint of someone's world. And now, the FBI is working with third-party experts to unlock it. What they find may link the tie to someone on the original suspect list, or someone brand new, someone who never thought they'd be connected. Maybe it'll point to Richard McCoy. Maybe not. Maybe it'll finally give this mystery the answer it deserves. But here's the strange, poetic truth. For all the cleverness of the hijack, for all the precision and planning that went into the jump, Cooper's undoing may come from the one thing he left behind, not in a forest, not in a river, but in a fabric thread, on a discount store tie. Something so ordinary it never should have mattered. And now, it just might be everything. 50 years have passed, half a century since a man in a dark suit and cheap tie walked onto a commercial jetliner with nothing but a briefcase, a bourbon, and a plan. And still, his name lingers. Not just in case files, but in campfire tales, late-night radio shows, conspiracy forums, and Hollywood dreams. D.B. Cooper is no longer just a mystery. He's a myth, a folk hero to some, a criminal genius to others. A man who, in a time of turmoil and distrust, pulled off the impossible and vanished. No other crime in American history has captured the public imagination quite like this one. There have been hijackings before and since, ransoms, escapes, but none have endured. None have transformed into cultural legend the way Cooper's story has. There are Netflix documentaries dissecting every second of his flight, folk songs romanticizing the man in the sky, entire novels and movies built around the mystery. Even in fiction, Cooper appears, like a ghost drifting between genres, always out of reach. Why? Because Cooper didn't just steal money. He stole an ending. No trial, no arrest, no confession. Just a man with a parachute and a one-way ticket into the unknown. He became a symbol of rebellion, of mystery, of the kind of clean getaway that only seems possible in books or dreams. And every time we think we've gotten close to the truth, he slips just a little further into legend. The recent evidence, McCoy's parachute, the tie's atomic secrets, the whispers of DNA, has pulled us closer than ever. Richard Floyd McCoy remains the strongest lead. The parachute found in his mother's shed. The uncanny similarities between his heist and Cooper's. The military background. The escape artist's daring. But even if McCoy was Cooper, we're still missing the final piece. The DNA. The confession. The moment someone looks into a camera and says, "It was me." Until then, Cooper remains frozen in time, permanently mid-jump, suspended between clouds and trees, between myth and reality. He is a question without an answer, a name without a face, a story without an ending. And maybe that's why we can't let go. Because in a world where everything is tracked, recorded, surveilled, he pulled off something that feels, even now, like magic. He got away with it. And until the day we find him, he always will. So, could the final DNA test land Richard Floyd McCoy in the crosshairs once and for all? Or could it point to someone else entirely? Someone still hiding in plain sight? Did D.B. Cooper survive the wilderness that stormy night? Did he vanish into the forest with a smirk and a duffel bag, slipping quietly into a new life? Or did he die the moment his boots hit the earth? And what if, just what if, McCoy wasn't the mastermind at all? What if Cooper is still out there, older now, watching from a distance, as the world tries, year after year, to put a name to his shadow? We want to hear what you think. Who was the man in seat 18C? Was this the perfect crime or the perfect illusion? Drop your theories in the comments. Share this video with every true crime addict, every mystery lover, every armchair detective you know. Because the next chapter might just change everything. This is far from over. And if history has taught us anything, it's this. D.B. Cooper always leaves us wanting more. If this story has both fascinated and horrified you, remember, true crime is far from over. In fact, the next story we're going to explore might be even more shocking. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification button to stay up to date with more real-life stories that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Remember to leave your comment and thoughts below. The dark truths behind some of the most chilling crimes are just beginning. Stay tuned. The next story is waiting, and it's one that'll send a shiver down your spine. Thanks for watching.